English translation. 629th Contact Tuesday, the 29th of September 2015, 21:53 hours.
Greetings, Quetzal. I'm glad to welcome you here again. Welcome, my friend. It's a real pleasure to meet you.
Greetings on my part too, my friend, and I too am glad to see you. I felt the need to come here because I want to see for myself how you are doing after the surgical intervention on your heart.
Thank you for your concern for me, but at the moment I cannot say that my condition is bad, because last Sunday I received a tiny medicine from Florina which put me back on my feet, precisely because I was feeling bad. Since the operation, unfortunately, it has been the case that my well-being is constantly fluctuating, so that good and bad are constantly alternating. It is probably the case that with regard to my health, everything first has to settle down and regulate itself again, which certainly takes time.
This is undoubtedly the case because not only your heart with the implanted aortic valve must find its position, but also your entire organism. For about 5 decades, everything has been extremely strained and affected by your suffering, which means that the whole organism needs a lot of rest and strength for a healthy regeneration. Therefore, you have to pay the necessary attention to this fact. You must not underestimate your shaky state of health, because the whole thing was really more serious than you might see, as Ptah explained to me according to his diagnosis.
I am doing it, at least as well as I can.
It is really necessary, because you have to take care that you give your health enough rest and recovery.
I will do it, my son, and I will not let my head down.
Everything has apparently not broken your optimistic nature, but that is good, because you need your confidence and your constant rays of hope, which you create again and again. What I want to tell you, though, even though I have not visited you recently, Ta, Florina, and Njana informed me about all the things that happened in the center. I was also here once and inspected the garden and the greenhouse, and found that the whole of your organizational work had resulted in my sense and satisfaction, so there is nothing to complain about. Only with regard to tomato cultivation do I have to say that there have been errors in this respect, which I am sure you have also noticed, namely that various inferior tomato varieties have been planted, the yields of which were more than just minimal.
Yes, they were really minor plants, and moreover not just one, but 5 different and cheap varieties, which brought hardly any flowers and only a few tomatoes. The plants were brought to me with the statement that they were good, and from a gardener who understood their subject. Obviously, this was not really the case, because it turned out that the plant varieties were not worth much, so we could harvest less than 2 kilograms of tomatoes from 17 plants. This contrasts with the fact that when I bought the 17 necessary plants from our house gardener, I could harvest up to 50 or 60 kilos of tomatoes. How it will be next year, that proves to be, because Andrea has various tomato and vegetable seeds, which she will sow in February and then bring me the seedlings. What results from that, that will prove to be true.
That's what you told Pa, what he told me. I like to be surprised by the result.
Which is also the case with me.
What I want to say is, before I came here to your workroom, I spent 2 hours in the center area, taking a close look at everything, and finding out to my satisfaction that no further damage had been done to the trees, bushes, and shrubs, so that all the plants in question could recover well and have unfolded their splendor again.
With regard to bushes and shrubs, or bush and shrub, I wanted to say this at the time when you mentioned their circumcision years ago. Earthlings make no difference, because for them a shrub is a bush and a bush is a bush. But you distinguish these plants into 2 different genera, as I know, because already Svath has taught me something about this, but also you, who also deals with earthly dendrology as well as bush and shrubbery, whereby I think that shrubbery should actually mean in Greek chamodendrology or chamnosdendrology, whereby this term, however, as far does not exist in Old or Modern Greek.
That is correct what you say about bushes and shrubs, but I do not know what the Greek term for shrubbery is, because I am not particularly well versed in this language.
Unfortunately, I have not forgotten many things, because I don't need Greek anymore since I Well, you know.
Yes, I understand. Well, bushes and shrubs are basically different plants, whereby the shrub has a growth form similar to the tree. The tree forms a thick trunk or main trunk, rarely also twin, triple, or quadruple trunks, and thus has a main axis, while the shrub has no main trunk or main axis, but is thin multi-trunk. The shrub is a shrub with a basitonic growth habit, which means that it usually forms a larger number of thin or to thicker rod-like stems or trunks each year, from which buds sprout close to the ground. With regard to basitonia, the promotion of bud size at the base of annual shoots is to be understood. This results in stronger lateral shoot growth at the shoot base. Basitony is typical for shrubs and persistent herbaceous plants. The structure of the shrub is formed by the usually annual formation of new shoots from buds close to the ground. Contrary to the basitonie, the acrotonia is given, in which the promotion of buds at the tips of annual shoots is typical for trees. Then there is mesotony, in which the development and branching of the shoots in the middle area is characteristic for certain shrubs. Shrubs are exclusively persistent woody plants that cover the ground or grow upright and have several upright and usually thin to firmer stems or trunks, from which branches are formed, which, depending on the shrub, form leaves or needles, whereby they can be deciduous or needle-dropping or even semi-evergreen, evergreen, deciduous, or wintergreen. Shrubs are very important breeding grounds for various bird species, both at the edge of forests and in hedges, gardens, and parks. It is also true that various bushes also occur as trees, such as the gray alder and the hazelnut bush, where you planted a hazelnut tree at the biotope behind the hiker's resting place, which became quite large. The nuts of hazelnut bushes and hazelnut trees, etc., are buried by rodents, such as squirrels, as a winter stock, but are often not found again, so they germinate and take root. As far as bushes are concerned, it should be said that in earthly botany a false study was carried out, from which it erroneously emerged that bushes and shrubs are one and the same. It is therefore a fact that bushes are not shrubs, but perennial, polycanthy or perennial herbaceous plants and perennials, whose above-ground plant parts, in contrast to trees and shrubs, do not lignify but are herbaceously soft, which usually die off after each vegetation period. Contrary to other herbaceous plants, which are only annual or biennial, bushes or perennials last several years and bloom and produce new fruits every year, contrary to the hapaxanthic or plural herbs. Depending on the species, bushes or shrubs hibernate as rootstocks or in the form of rhizomes, tubers, or bulbs, but actually as parts of the shoot, as stolons or runners or parts of the shoot. Similar root storage organs are also present, which may be located just above Earth's surface as geo or cryptophytes or as hemicryptophytes. The so-called hibernation buds naturally cause the bushes or perennials to sprout again and again in the subsequent vegetation periods, although it should be noted that there are deviations from this rule, because among the bushes and perennials, there are also various wintergreen species that do not move in or go below Earth's surface. In the temperate zones, as well as in the cold ones, these bushes are so low that they are covered by snow. These plants correspond to woody campophytes or dwarf shrubs. The spectrum of bushes and perennials ranges from small succulents and fleshy, juicy plants, which can find their way around and exist especially during drought, to large, magnificent perennials. In addition to the actual flowering perennials, most hardy ferns also belong to the bushes or perennials, as do many grasses, bulbs, tubers, and aquatic plants. Various bushes, such as the berry bushes, form thorns on their thin branches, protecting them from wild browsing. Their reproduction takes place via berries or nuts, which are eaten by birds or mammals, after which the berry and nut seeds mixed with the excrements find their way out again and take root in the soil and can germinate. Fruits, such as berries and nuts, also fall to the ground around the mother plant and form new plants there. A wind propagation of the seeds is hardly possible because by the low height of the shrubs, these are not attacked by strong winds.
Thank you for your explanation.
Ta informed me that during his visit on the 18th of September, you said a lot in detail about the European Union dictatorship, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, the number of refugees, the USA and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Ptah recommends that you immediately publish this part of the conversation in a Figu time sign and post it on the internet, if possible adding a little more.
Oh, and why immediately?
It's a matter of time.
Well, can I do, and if it has to be, then I can also say something more about the whole, if you perhaps want to hear it too.
I'd love to.
Well, in my opinion, the matter with the hundreds of thousands of refugees has escalated into a drama and even an ongoing tragedy, causing unforeseen and huge problems. As I have already said in other conversations and also stated in articles, the main blame for this lies with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. The latter was crazy enough to sound the sound of a mad drum that all refugees from all dictatorial and war-laden countries were welcome in Germany and in the EU dictatorship and would receive decent help. This welcome invitation went of course like a lightning-fast wildfire on tour, both to civil war-ravaged Syria, which was infested by Islamist terror, and also to Iraq, other Arab states and African countries. The Chancellor's bigoted and unrealistic nonsense was inevitably understood by hundreds of thousands of people as an invitation to leave their homeland as refugees and to make their way to Germany, Sweden, and other countries of the EU dictatorship. This, whereby many can only be judged by the term economic refugees and wealthy refugees, who also had and have enough money to finance their flight to the European dictatorship empire. And it is these refugees who cowardly leave their homeland and abandon it, instead of doing something to create peace and also something economically in their homeland so that a life there becomes possible. And these refugees are usually the ones who go to the rich industrial countries of Europe, to the EU dictatorship and also to the USA, to hold out their hands to the aid money that has to be paid by the hard-working people of the well-off states, namely by the horrendous taxes branched off by the powerful states, which have to be paid by the hard-working citizens and very often are uselessly squandered by stupid government machinations. But the whole thing of the refugee tragedy has still many other bad consequences, because both the effectively correct refugees, who flee from their homeland, because they are threatened of life and their existence and security and who must very well be helped in human duty, and the well-off economic and prosperity refugees must be fed and medically cared for. All of them, whether real refugees or profiteer refugees fleeing only from their home countries to hold out their open hands in the affluent states of Europe and the USA, etc., into which golden fruits should fall without having to do any work, cannot, of course, live and sleep on the streets without asylum legislation. Nor can they simply be exposed to starvation in the refugee states for reasons of humanity alone, so they inevitably have to be fed, which costs billions for hundreds of thousands of refugees and refugees. Consequently, they must be cared for in every possible way and also housed in dwellings, just as medical and hygienic aid must be provided to them, all of which costs millions and billions of dollars, and thus enormous sums of money, which must be raised by the hard-working taxpayers of the countries of refuge. All kinds of care personnel are also needed, and they are indispensable for the true and false refugees, as well as for the housing contacts, dwellings, housing estates, and various other buildings of some kind, which must be made available in order to give the true and false refugees a roof over their heads. But all such existing, empty, and made available accommodation possibilities do not suffice any longer. Consequently, by the authorities and governments as well as various organizations, etc., to the drastic measure of the inevitable seizure of all possible premises is seized, which will lead in the long run up to the expropriation of private dwellings and real estates, if the ever more horrendous rising refugee nature is not stopped by a reasonable fight against the causes in the refugee countries, and a stop is pushed forward. What is currently happening with the refugee flows in Europe and will spread to the whole world in the future has little to do with flight for reasons of threatened life, in the true sense of the word, because a large proportion of the refugees cannot be called real refugees because they shamefully abandon their homeland only for reasons of economic profit in order to live better in luxury in Europe or the USA and to become wealthy. That this crazy idea, which has spread like wildfire not only in the Occident and the whole of the West, but as far as the Orient and the Orient, as well as to Africa, Asia and South America, through the nonsense of Angela Merkel's invitation to refugees, and which really makes life-threatening refugees come to Europe, was foreseeable for the rationale. But since Merkel, who suffers from reality falsity naivety, but also lacks clear understanding and reason as a result, was not able to judge the consequences of her idiotic speeches, precisely the resulting refugee tragedy and its far-reaching consequences, today the whole of Europe is under the refugee foxtail. But the problem is not those refugees who flee their homeland and come to Europe as a result of danger to their lives, but the hundreds of thousands of economic refugees who have been attracted by Merkel's bullshit and will continue to flow into Europe, because they are truly no refugees, but effective refugee tourists who engage in refugee tourism. Their ideas, which they have with regard to quickly achieving great prosperity in Europe, especially in Germany and in the EU dictatorship, and being fed by the EU dictatorship population with clothes, cars, and all kinds of luxury and financial aid, have the enormous catch of the fact that this will in no way be the case, because in the end the authorities and governments and also the people from the populations who are still helpful today will have to clamp down everything in this respect. Of course, help cannot be provided endlessly, because every state, including all countries of the EU dictatorship, pushes not only financially, but also in every respect to its limits and must ultimately capitulate to the streams of refugees and the demands of the refugees. Ultimately, it is inevitable that the whole thing will lead to the collapse of social peace in all the countries flooded by refugees, which will be the case in the future worldwide, when 300 to 350 million people around the world will be fleeing, which will inevitably be the case in the future due to man-made climate change and horrendous overpopulation. The growing world population will have less and less room to live and to be together. Consequently, people will step on each other's feet, become more and more indifferent to each other, and begin to hate and harass each other more and more. But it will be even more, and everything will get much worse, because that will bring with it the refugee tragedy fueled in Europe by Angela Merkel and all her submissive state officials, as well as climate change and the coming natural disasters of all kinds. But it will also be the general unpeacefulness of the masses of mankind, as well as the free restriction of men through the violence of the authorities, military, governments, and security forces. Consequently, the general freedom of men will be more and more curtailed, and they will be supervised in a totalitarian way and brought absolutely under control. Totalitarian control by the authorities, the military, the state, and the security forces in this respect will be a welcome in the future. Although the first loops have already been designed and are in operation for this purpose, in which the people of all nations have already become entangled today by these forces, and are restricted in their actual freedom, as well as in some fundamental rights. The streams of refugees, and this is another problem, consist of people from different social strata, mentalities, and religions, and it is precisely this that causes discord among them, as well as hatred and envy, which inevitably leads to violence and quarrels, as well as theft, murder, and manslaughter, and to betrayal, slander, and rape among the refugees. But even in these situations, the right thing is not being done to avoid everything, because it is simply impossible for security forces to keep such masses of people, such as refugees, under control in every necessary way. Nor is it done what would be necessary and would consist in the need to combat the causes of flight in the countries of origin or flight, just like every dictatorship and every terror of war and terror, as well as the lame and underdeveloped economy. This is not talked of in any government in the world, not even of Merkel and all her subservient government trolls in the EU dictatorship. So in the refugee countries, the causes of flight, such as dictatorship, terrorism, civil war, oppression, abuse of laws and persecution, are not fought against and not completely eradicated, just as the ailing economy is neither ended nor flourished. The fact that in all countries the forms of authorities and government would have to be transformed into pure and direct democracies, and that effective freedom, peace, and just correct and humanly justifiable legislation would have to be established and guaranteed, which would apply equally to all citizens of the respective state, without distinction between the rich and the poor, government officials, officials and state employees, etc., also remains for the time being only an illusion, because all those responsible for the state all over the world have neither a brilliant idea nor the will to do so. And there is even less consideration of the need to create a multinational peace struggle force to create peace, freedom, and order throughout the world. However, this can only be possible through such a multinational force that acts uniformly worldwide and is suzerain-led and commanded by an authoritative, peaceful, rational, powerless, logically thinking, and intentionally forward-looking world body. Only through such a multinational peace struggle force can it happen that all dictatorships and terrorist organizations, as well as all power-hungry state powers, criminal organizations can be effectively and definitively fought against and dissolved. But this can only happen if a multinational force takes up the fight against all evil in a uniform and just manner, and conducts every fight in such a way that peace, freedom, and harmony come to rule, as well as that all human rights are respected, and that illogical violence, criminality, delusion, sectarianism and crime, terrorism and war of all kinds are rendered completely null and void. Also, on the one hand, the ever more rapidly growing overpopulation must be stopped by a worldwide birth ban and by state-controlled birth control, and on the other hand, all catastrophic effects and degenerations in relation to human machinations with regard to climate, nature, and its fauna and flora must be finally stopped.
There is much more to be said about the whole thing, but I think there is enough for this time in terms of what you have said.
That is the case, because the topic leads far into the future, and there is still a lot to be said about that. But let's leave it at that for today.
Then I want to leave now, because on the one hand, I have nothing more to mention, and on the other hand, I have to do my job again, if you don't have something else that we have to discuss.
I did not know. So your way is clear if you have to go. Goodbye, Quetzal, dear friend. Goodbye, goodbye.
It will be certain that I will visit you again. Live well and take care of your well-being. Goodbye, my friend.
Salami, and bye.